Hello, everyone. So I'll be going over our Explore the Coast Grants program priorities. And number one would be that your program should include at least all of these priorities that I'm about to talk about. You don't have to include all of these priorities, but it should at least touch on multiple of these priorities or think about how your program can bring these priorities out. And number one would be offering an enjoyable and valuable experience on the coast, whether it be just leisuring on the coast, going kayaking, or learning, or just going out to swim. Number two would be providing a positive and long-term impact. So that would be making memories that participants can remember in the future and want to return to the coast. And number three would be inspiring and ongoing leadership and coastal stewardship. So this could be anywhere from teaching participants about the coast, the importance of the coast, that can inspire them to return to the coast to do more stewardship, or even lead them to a job that can promote coastal stewardship. Number four would be connecting groups that consistently face barriers. And this could be groups that are inland California and want to get to the coast and need physical transportation, or just need some sort of monetary funds to get to the coast. And the next one is to serve the diverse population of California. So in California, we have a lot of people of different cultural backgrounds, and we want to make sure that in the particular region that you're in, you are making sure that you're serving that specific population or multiple populations, and making sure they have an opportunity to get to the coast. And the next one is reducing economic, physical, and operational or social barriers. And that can be either providing transportation to the coast, teaching participants to use public transportation to get to the coast, or creating a sense of belonging at the coast by teaching them about the coast and creating some sort of ownership that they can return to the coast.
Thanks, Emily, for going over our program priorities. And I want to talk a little bit about the programs that we fund. Typically, we really like programs that bring people to the coast to enjoy the natural assets, play, learn to surf, kayak, or sail, anything fun, we really love to see. We also like programs that are hands-on, highly interactive, immersive, and helps build positive connections to the coast. We also like to look for programs that not only help participants to overcome barriers to coastal access, which Emily discussed previously, but also barriers in the long run that help give people the comfort and safety at being in the ocean. Finally, we like to see programs that have some type of leadership component or job skills. These are all things that we like to see in our projects. We don't like to emphasize one or the other, but at the very least, projects should have some type of fun recreational component. And examples of grantees that we've funded in the past are Girl Ventures, who bring girls from underserved communities in the Bay Area to the coast and bring them there for a range of activities to help develop confidence and leadership. There's Outdoor Outreach in San Diego, who also do similar activities, but also have a leadership subset for a subset of their students and hire participants as staff. And this touches upon some of the long-term positive impact that projects can have. Finally, we have Jug Handle Creek Farm and Nature Center to the right, And this project brings participants from multiple Native communities from Mendocino and Lake counties to the Mendocino coast for cultural practices and recreational activities. Now, Emily will be talking about what we don't fund.
So projects that we will not fund are projects that are solely focused on the classroom, and that would be if your program is just specifically on helping get curriculum up to speed on environmental education. So we do like that, but we want to get people physically out to the coast as well. So you can include both components, but it cannot be solely classroom based. We also are not going to fund projects that are solely beach cleanups, because we want to think about how some of the participants rarely get to get out physically on the coast. And so we want them to have a fun and enjoyable, memorable experience on the coast. And so your project can include beach cleanups, but it cannot be solely beach cleanups. And this grant program does not fund construction of facilities. If you have an idea of a facility that requires construction, please reach out to us and we can probably help you find a grant that we can work with you, but not this grant program.
So now we're going to go into sort of the application section, but I'm going to point out some highlights from the 2022-23 round. Approximately 9 million will be available for the entire grant round. And the maximum award for each project will be $100,000 for each year the program will be running for. Projects can start in late 2022 or early 2023, and they must finish by early 2025, so February 2025. Mistake on that bullet point there. Applications are due Friday, March 11th, 2022. And selected proposals will be presented to the Conservancy Board for approval in fall 2022. And Emily will talk about funding.
So the Budget Act of 2021 allocated $14 million of state general funds for the Explore the Coast grant program to spend by 2026. This is great because this program is regularly oversubscribed and we typically get allocated $700K per year from other sources of support. This is good news because this means we can support more ETC programs and say yes to more projects in the coming years. And we want to do this because we want to continue to support and help community get access to the coast and enjoy the coast all around California and the San Francisco Bay. And additionally, we are using part of the $14 million to help fund our Coastal Stories grant program. But this year, as Virgilio mentioned, we are allocating $9 million to spend for 2022 and 2023 grant rounds.
So now it's the application. Eligible applicants are public agencies, federally recognized tribes, or nonprofit organizations with 501c3 status. For example, a grant applicant can be a health-focused organization bringing participants to the beach. Submit all applications to grant@scc.ca.gov by 5 p.m. on March 11th, 2022. Please read each question carefully and follow the instructions under each question. Unless otherwise indicated, responses should be 1 to 2 concise paragraphs per question. So these 3 questions will help reviewers understand what your project will be and do. First question is the project summary. This question is the first question, and it's really sort of your pitch, or your elevator pitch rather. So in as concise a way as possible, summarize your program, talk about communities served, talk about total number of participants served, primary participant activities, key objectives to your project, the coastal location. Please try to include all of that in the project summary. Question 2 will be participant experience. And this question will be specifically what participants will be doing over the course of your program. So what will the days, trips, and activities look like? And if it helps, you can attach a program schedule to support your response. If your proposal consists of multiple parts, list and describe each segment so that reviewers are able to distinguish them from one another. Lastly, ETC program priorities. This question talks about how your project provides an enjoyable experience at the coast, reduces economic, physical, operational, and societal barriers to the coast, inspires ongoing coastal resource stewardship through a number of different activities, also whether or not your project serves a diverse population of California, and whether or not your project has long-term positive impacts. Your project doesn't need to meet all these program priorities, but you should describe them in some way, or describe in some way how your project achieves multiple priorities, if possible. The next slide, Emily will talk about ETC priority communities served.
So for question 3, we want to know what participants your project is going to work with. And we want to know the number of participants you expect to serve with this conservancy grant. So this is more of a qualitative question. And we are looking for projects that serve at least 50% of participants that are part of our Explore the Coast priority communities. And our Explore the Coast priority communities include people who are low income, people with physical disabilities, people with cognitive or emotional disabilities, English as a second language learners, foster or unhoused youth, and people of color, and that includes Black, Asian Pacific Islander, Latinx, and Indigenous people.
So question 3 also has some qualitative questions. So these are questions that ask, why you're intending to serve the community that you're proposing. And be sure to discuss barriers that your community faces, or the community that you're serving faces, and how your organization can work to overcome those barriers. You also want to talk about how inclusive your project's going to be, and whether or not it takes into consideration the community that is participating. Will your project serve those with physical, cognitive, or emotional disabilities? You'll want to talk about that in this question.
Question 4 talks about long-term. We want to know more about your long-term positive impacts. This can describe any long-term impacts that you hope to have on the participants. And I'll go over some examples, but it doesn't necessarily have to be these examples. If you have your own way of creating long-term positive impact, please describe what it is and help the reader make that connection on how you think that you're creating long-term positive impacts for your participants. Some examples are, of course, creating leadership development opportunities. 2 is having multi-year programs or programs that engage participants over multiple occasions. Number 3 is having a family or support system involvement. That means bringing out family members to participate in the program. And number 4 is peer mentorship. Question 6, we want to know about how you're building and fostering connections with your participants. Is there, how is your presence and relationship to the community served? Is there a community involved with the program development? This can either mean that the community sits on the board of the organization. Do they volunteer? Or is the staff or is the participant now part of staff? Is there a pathway for participants to become staff? And lastly, we want to know who are your community partners and how do they strengthen your organization?
So next is the project scope table. For those of you who are familiar with our application in the past, this table is a little bit more robust, I guess. This time we've tried to streamline it in a way that you only need to provide information on how your project addresses project management, project preparation, and project implementation. As you can see from the table, you'll want to describe each of those elements in the second column, provide a timeline, like a starting point, an end point for each element, and milestones. So for instance, a milestone to project management can be, or project preparation can be a roster of project participants or a roster of instructors who will be delivering your project. You'll want to talk about those milestones or list them out in the last column.
And then question 8, we want to know about how you're dealing with pandemic restrictions. We don't necessarily encourage programs to still keep running if there is a COVID surge. We want everyone to be as safe as possible, but we do want to know how your project is adapting to pandemic restrictions. And you can elaborate on how that has worked for you in the past. And we want to know any health and safety measures that your projects include, whether that be holding smaller outing events, providing masks for participants, and etc. Just let us know how your program is adapting to the pandemic.
So next up is the budget question. Again, so for those of you who are familiar with our application, in the past, we've asked you to fill out a budget table. This year, we're allowing applicants to submit their budget in whatever form they wish. You just need to make sure that you include separate lines for indirect costs and to try and provide as much detail as possible so that we have a pretty good understanding of what our funding is going to go towards. You'll want to talk about cost to participants, if any, if there's going to be any subsidies or scholarships given out to your participants, and list any in-kind donations or other type of program support if possible. Finally, I'm going to mention it here just because it's related to budget, but in the past, we've allowed up to 15% of the grant total to be dedicated towards overhead or indirect costs. Now we're allowing 20% of your grant total. So this should help fund your overhead costs in a better way.
For question 11, we want to know about applicants' capacity. So we want to know about the organization's capacity to implement the project. And there are other subset of questions that we want to know about, but these will not be graded these questions are more for us to know how much technical assistance we should be offering for our Explore the Coast partners. So we want to know whether you have grant writers to help you write your application. We want to know if you have project managers, the history of managing grants, and the size and location of the organization. We believe that this would be useful information for us so that we can gauge where our Explore the Coast grant partners are at, and then work towards hopefully offering better technical assistance.
To help you with your applications, if you have any questions, you can request a project consultation. Just contact us at explorethecoast@scc.ca.gov and try to include the ETC region your project's going to be located in. So for instance, Bay Area is number 3, Central Coast would be number 5. If possible, just try to include that in your request so that we know who to allocate your consultation to. In addition, we're also going to be hosting what we're calling technical assistance office hours. And these are times that we've reserved. They're sort of like Zoom sessions that applicants can log into, and project managers will be on staff to assist with questions regarding your application, budget, project eligibility. And these are going to be asked in a group setting, but if you require more one-on-one assistance, if there's availability, staff will pull you into a breakout room to assist with any more private questions.
Lastly, we want to go over typical grant terms, what to expect if you get a grant. So once a conservancy has approved a grant at a public meeting, the conservancy staff will prepare a grant agreement, set forth the terms and conditions of the grant, and the grantee must sign the agreement and comply with all the conditions in order to receive the funds. We also want to let you know that expenses incurred before the grant agreement with the conservancy, before the conservancy grant agreement is signed, cannot be billed to the grant. And this is new, as Virgilio said. This conservancy usually allowed 15% for overhead or indirect costs, and now we are doing it at 20%. The conservancy reimburses grants for expenses after they are incurred. This means that the grantee will have to cover cost of the project between the time the expenses are incurred and they will get paid by the conservancy thereafter. Grantees are typically required to maintain general liability, automobile, and other forms of insurance during the grant term, and the general liability is usually $1 million. All conservancy grantees should expect to be audited by the state of California. It is the grantee's responsibilities to maintain all necessary records to substantiate and all documents, payments made pursuant to the Coastal Conservancy grant. If the grantee cannot provide adequate records when they are audited, they may be required to repay the grant funds. This is to say that not all our grants are audited, but you should keep records and be expected to be audited in case this is your grant that is audited. Now we will go over questions and comments. So if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we will answer them live right now.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions in the chat. So we can start off with our question by Sarah. If our fiscal last 2 years do not show a budget of 100,000, even though we have a tax exemption, can we do a collaboration and the fiscal nonprofit be the lead?
This question's a little confusing. Let me read it.
I can answer that in terms of we do We do allow groups to have a fiscal sponsor. That's basically the question. We have
Oh.
several groups that use a fiscal sponsor.
Okay.
I think that's the question.
Yeah, if that's not the question you're trying to ask, please maybe elaborate and ask the question again.
We can also bring Sarah in so she can elaborate on her question. Our next question is from Erin. Could you go over who is eligible to apply again? Are universities eligible?
If I recall correctly, and Trish, correct me if I'm wrong, since we're using general funds this year, we can't use general funds towards educational type programs. Is that correct?
If
It's, yeah, that's right. There's a complicated restriction around funding educational programs, but I don't think it applies at the university level. We should confirm that with our attorney and get back to you because it only relates to general funds.
Yeah.
But typically universities are eligible.
if the university is applying for a program that brings students out to the coast, I would think they are eligible, but it couldn't be, your project can't just be curriculum based.
Okay, so our next question comes from Grayton. Could a gift gas card to attendees for outdoor coastal events be considered a subsidy?
I think it can, but I don't think that this is something that we want to move towards using our funds towards. We want projects to actually teach students to get out to the coast and provide other methods to subsidize cost. Because the gas card can be used. We have no way of knowing how the gas card is going to be used by the participant, and that is an issue with using our funds for.
Okay, and our next question comes from Holly. How frequently is the particular grant opportunity offered?
Well, this grant program is offered yearly. So usually it's at the start of each year that we release the RFP. This year, we're also allowing existing grantees the option to submit through our renewal RFP application. But yeah, typically it's an annual program.
Our next question comes from Trudy. Are we able to provide the program to participants in more than one region?
Yes.
Yes.
You are able to provide program to participants in more than one region. Just please help us understand, please write how many regions you are working with, which region you're working with the participants and how you're working to connect with them in a meaningful way.
So our next question is from Sarah. Is the 20% of overhead and indirect costs percentage include staff funding or is it separate?
So our overhead costs cover things that can't be considered direct costs. So you can use you can bill us for staffing costs that are related to the project implementation or preparation. But if they're just general staffing costs, you'll want to include that under, overhead or indirect.
So our next question is from Grayton again. Are general liability insurance premiums an eligible expense to the project? Parentheses, term of coverage for length of the project.
So we can't cover the general liability, the whole general liability insurance for your organizations. But if your insurance went up because of our grant program, we are able to work with you.
Our next question comes from Peggy. How often can you turn in the reimbursement for expenses?
We like to see requests for disbursement at least quarterly, but you can turn them in monthly if you need to.
We should probably also say that we do now have the ability to advance funds for
Yeah.
ETC grants. There's a process for qualifying for that, but if that's an issue for your organization, you should talk with somebody during a technical assistance consultation about that.
So our next question is from Ruel. He says, is there a scoring rubric for applications that you could share?
We have a rubric that we're working on solidifying. I don't think we can share it before, Trish, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we can't share it until after we have scored all the applications, right?
No, we could share our score sheet once it's finalized.
Okay.
I think it's close to final, but I'm not sure we're ready to. I'm not sure we're 100% finalized.
Well, contact us if you would like to see the score sheet.
Well, or if there's been a request, maybe we could post it when we're done with it.
Okay.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee. Do grant terms also require board resolutions?
Yes. Yeah. Grant terms also require you to take that you have accepted our grant to your board, and we need them to sign the document.
So our next question comes from Andrew. Can we apply for funding of just a part of a program? An example, if we have a larger program but need help with wetsuits, could we apply for just that portion of the program?
Yes.
Okay, our next question is from Susan. If you now have 20% of overhead, does this suggest that you don't want salaries in the main part of the budget request?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, but I don't think we request salaries in our applications. In fact, if I remember correctly, we discourage that, right?
So, I don't know if this is the question, Susan, you're asking. So we are allowed to pay for project management. That means your staff is managing the project itself, and you can include that in the regular budget. And overhead costs includes things like paying for your keeping the light bill on at your organization, or keeping any administrative stuff going and helping your organization function. So staff time and salary for the project can be included in the regular budget.
And I believe that our next question is from Sarah. Might be pertaining to a past question. Sarah's asking, funds we asked will be based on percentage of funds we managed in the last 2 years.
Sarah, I'm a little confused by your question, but that is okay if you're using if you're creating your budget based on how the cost incurred in the past 2 years, that is perfectly fine. Just make sure you have a statement on how that you break down the cost in your budget table.
Okay, the next question is, would a community science type project be eligible as a stewardship component?
Yeah, I think so. I've seen that before in some projects.
Then our next question is, will awards be evenly distributed among the various coastal regions of the state?
Yes, we typically try and distribute costs amongst all of the California state. And we typically get projects that are along the California coast. So we encourage regions that are inland to please apply, or encourage nonprofits to further outreach to participants inland the coast so that they also get access to the coast.
Okay. And our next question comes from Paul. Could the CCC, I'm assuming the Coastal Commission, correct me if I'm wrong, grant funding also help support the teacher over time when the teacher from an inland school takes a weekend day to accompany a school field trip for a dragon boat excursion?
I think we have to get back to you on that. There has been I know that there was an accounting issue before with overtime pay, and I don't remember how it was resolved. So you have to get back to you on that.
Okay, our next question is from an anonymous attendee. Is there a minimum expense budget amount from the organization in order to be eligible to apply for the grant?
We prefer not to process grants less than $5,000. But if it's less and it meets our priorities, we'd still do it. But just ask us for more.
So our next question was pertaining to a previous question that Sarah had. It says, Sarah may be under the impression that a minimum organization budget of 100,000 is required to apply for the grant. And the question is there a minimum nonprofit annual budget size requirement?
I think this might be related to the previous question, but no, there's no minimum nonprofit budget. As Trish mentioned, we'd prefer it if you request more, especially during this grant round, since there's quite a bit of funds available, but your budget doesn't need to be $100,000 per year in order to qualify for this grant. That's just the maximum.
Yeah, but I think they also meant their budget of other funding being a certain level. One of the scoring criteria is the Grantees Qualifications. So your demonstrated ability to handle grants is a factor. And so if you're asking for a grant much bigger than anyone you've ever handled, you probably won't score as well on it.
Yeah, and if you have any concerns with this, then please find a fiscal sponsor so that you can still get your program up and running. And if you need help finding a fiscal sponsor, please reach out and maybe we can help you get connected.
I'll also add, for all nonprofits, we do require you to fill out our nonprofit questionnaire, which has several questions related to your sort of administrative and financial oversight capacity. This is not a document that we make decisions on. However, if we're concerned with things, with answers, we'll either work with you to address those concerns, or we'd work with you to help you find a fiscal sponsor.
Our next question comes from Carol. She is asking, will the grant fund 2-year projects at 200,000?
Yes, we are going to fund grants for 200,000 for 2 years, but again, please elaborate in your budget and have a budget description on why you need 200K and help us understand the cost and expense for each project component.
Our next question comes from Nicola. She wants to know, can we apply for funding that creates an educational experience around a specific stewardship activity? For example, Watershed restoration project, if the funding for that stewardship activity hasn't yet been secured.
Okay, go ahead.
So you can apply for fundings that create an educational experience, but we don't encourage you to apply for just a grant that creates an educational experience, because we want to focus on the students also having fun. So you can create a project that has both components, or tell us how you make the educational experience fun. But if it's just educational experience, it won't be as competitive.
So our next question comes from Paul. So Paul is saying that we understand the grant cannot pay for facilities. However, our new slipways require about 6 strong team members to launch and recover a Dragon boat. We would like to add winches or other launch retrieval assist devices to allow smaller number of team paddlers. Does this sort of equipment upgrade fall within the intent of the grant?
No. That doesn't mean I mean, you could have potentially included it in the budget, but that's not the kind of thing we're looking to fund. So it wouldn't be as competitive.
You can still apply for your project, but maybe find another funding source to cover that cost.
And our next question is from an anonymous. Will the renewal application be different from what you've shared today?
It's a streamlined version of what we presented today. And the requirement is just the application and an updated work plan for applicants.
The renewal application is also out on our website. If you're having trouble or can't find it, please reach out to us and we can get you the application. We also hosted a renewal webinar on Tuesday. So there is a recording out where we went over the questions in the renewal application. So again, if you want the recording, it's on our website, or you can contact us and we can send it to you directly.
As a follow-up to the gas card question that was asked earlier, could you please give an example of a subsidy?
An example of a subsidy would be possibly, you know, if you are taking students to the coast using public transportation, then you can use the funds to pay for the public transportation cost, but make sure that you keep the receipts of the public transportation cost so that we can reimburse you for that cost. Or the transportation, if you're using the cost to pay for buses, that could be considered a subsidy. So again, just keep the receipt and then we will reimburse you for that cost. Are there other examples anyone else wants to add on? Those are.
I was thinking of something, but I'm not sure if it applies to this grant program. I was thinking there are some projects that have larger, more long-term elements, kind of like long-term internships that provide sort of stipends, but I'm not so sure if that applies to ETC.
I guess along the same lines, if you have a leadership development program within your program, and those students are helping you push along the program, we can consider providing stipends for those leaders to be trained. We have had programs where leaders are trained to become lifeguards, and so we have paid for those costs.
Okay, our next question comes from Holly. Holly is asking, are applications for programs that have been funded through this grant previously encouraged or discouraged to apply?
Encouraged.
Yeah.
If your program, the program has changed over time. So, and what we prioritize, but if you still meet our priorities, absolutely encourage you. This is a good year to apply. It will be the least competitive year we've had, or, like the most money we've ever had by an order of magnitude.
And our next question, do grant award terms require a limited waiver of sovereign immunity at tribal specific due to the state source of funds?
Trish, can you talk about this one?
Yeah. For the ETC program, we are not requiring the waiver of tribal sovereign immunity, unless you ask for an advance, and then I think maybe we are, but under just the normal reimbursement style, we are not. And that's a change from the past.
Okay, our next question is from Greg. Greg is asking, do you need a justification of an overhead rate? For example, if there's an accounting audit, how is this expense determined?
I'll answer that. So if you have to have an overhead rate that is calculated by one of the accepted methods for a nonprofit, we don't know how to do that. You need to work with an accountant or other qualified person to establish your overhead rate. If you are audited by the state, you will need to show how your overhead rate is calculated. Though just about the only problems that the Coastal Conservancy has ever had with grantees being audited for any of its projects has been around their overhead rate. So please make sure that you have a properly calculated overhead rate.
Okay, our next question is from Yolanda. Yolanda is asking if there is an age limit to the target population.
No, there's no age limit. We want to encourage access to the coast to all communities in California. So there's no age limit.
Our next question is from Alina. For current grantees interested in reapplying, if the same project is proposed, will it be competitive, or are you looking for growth, for example, serving more individuals or a broader area?
No, if your project is good and meets our priorities, please feel free to reapply. It would still be competitive. I would also say, sorry, I missed the part of the question that I was going to answer. Can you bring it back up, Carol?
Let
I was just going to say, if you have an existing grant with us, you should have received an email with our renewal application. There's a separate recording from a webinar we had earlier this week for the renewal application, and you should use that one, not the application for a new project. That's if you have an existing ETC grant.
And maybe talk to your project manager to make sure that you are eligible to reapply, or if you should go through a new ETC grant process. And I remember the other second part of your question. I think it was if we were going to encourage you to have more participants to serve or broader participants. And the answer is no, because of the pandemic. Whatever your program feels comfortable serving, you should. We don't want to encourage you to have a larger group and then you can't meet those requirements because of the pandemic. So please be as realistic as you can be with your participants served. Additionally, we do not fund projects based. We want to see how many participants you serve, but if your project is focused on leadership development or mentoring, then we're not necessarily looking at how many participants you're serving. We're looking at your project components. So make sure that you elaborate on those aspects if that is what your project is focused on.
Our next question comes from Greg. Greg is asking if there is an opportunity to receive less funding than requested. So is the word all or nothing?
The answer to that is we will look at your budget and work with you on your budget request. And this year we do have a lot of funding available. So we probably will fund as much as we can. But in other instances, we have offered partial awards depending on your budget request.
So we have another question from Carol. She's asking, are support letters required for this application?
Support letters aren't required for the application, but if you're selected for funding, then we ask for support letters at that point.
Susan is asking, in the past, what percentage of this grant program has gone to coastal community science programs?
Mm-hmm. 10%? I don't know. You guys have a guess on that?
No, we haven't.
I'd say
those numbers.
Yeah. 10 to 20% would be my guess.
Margie is asking, what is the max number of years for the grant?
The grant can be for activities starting at the end of 2022 or early 2023, all the way out to February 2025. So that's about 2 years if you're starting at the beginning of 2023, or 2 years and 2 months if you are able to somehow make it at the end of this year.
And we have a question from an anonymous user. Can a grant include subcontracts for outdoor educational leadership components where the grantee is primarily organizing and working with the community for the fun / social / organizational components?
Yes, you can have subcontractors on this grant, whether it be for kayaking or going or renting out buses. So there's different types of subcontractors that you can add to this grant, and you can work with your manager to sort that out.
So we have another question from Adam. Does it hurt our chances of getting funding if we already have partial funding from another grant source for our existing program?
The way I understand it is that you can't be double billing. So if you're already receiving funding for, this project that you're proposing, you can't receive additional funding from us if it's specifically for that portion that's already being funded.
But if it's additive, like if you have funding for a certain portion of your program, but not the full program, you can absolutely ask us to fund the unfunded portion.
Right.
So we have another question from anonymous user. How can individual drivers to the coast be best reimbursed for expenses associated with getting to the coast? Can a van be purchased as part of the grant?
So grantees can be reimbursed for the mileage to get to the coast, and they need to bill at the state rate for that specific year and as far as buying vans, we discourage buying vans because it can become a very lengthy state procedure for purchasing large equipments like vans.
Yep, well, we more than discourage it. We're not allowing it under the program.
So it looks like we have 9 more questions and it's 3 p.m. Trish, should we continue answering the remaining questions or?
I think we should.
Okay.
People can drop off as they need to.
Sure.
So our next question comes from Stephanie. Do all the program engagements need to occur at the coast, or would it be acceptable to have some engagements and activities in rivers, creeks, and open spaces?
I can answer that. In the 9-county San Francisco Bay area, the activities can occur within San Francisco Bay and up into the Delta. In the outer coast, it is in the coast or a coastal type area. But we don't fund projects up into all watersheds.
We do have a specific Explore the River grant program in the Santa Ana River region. So if you are applying for that specific area, reach out and then we can get you a grant under a different program, but only for the Santa Ana River region because it's part of our jurisdiction.
So our next question comes from Gabriela. She is asking, can projects operate across the entire West Coast, or do they have to specifically only operate in California? We would request funding for only operations happening within California.
I missed the question, Vitalio. Can you take it?
Yeah, the way I understand the question is, this person's asking if even though their programs operate over the entire West Coast, they'd be submitting for projects that are only occurring on the coast. We would only be funding for activities that occur in the California coast, strictly California only. If you need more clarity on that, please feel free to contact us.
Okay, we have another question from Grayton. What is the audit requirements / or period of time after a project ends that an audit would occur?
Trish, can you answer that?
I think we have to get back to you on that. I think it's 3 years, but I'm not positive. And the audit requirements are, there's specific language in our grant agreement that basically is accounting speak, which we could provide. I'll also say that we've never had an ETC grant audited. That doesn't mean it won't happen.
So we have another question. Can the funds be used for outreach efforts prior to the event, such as production of marketing materials and organization of partners?
No, you cannot use the funds for anything that any cost that you incurred before the project grant agreement is signed and your conditions present within the grant agreement are complete.
But but if the question is, can we pay for like the startup work after you have a grant agreement in place? That we can. It's one of the tasks we have on the task list is, I don't know, project prep or something like that.
That can be, yeah, that can be part of the project component. But if you did it before you got your grant agreement and conditions present, then we cannot pay for it.
So we have another question from Paul, and Paul is asking, can we start with a conservative, generous fund amount and then simply return the unused funds if fewer schools than we would like to host take advantage of our offer?
We would discourage that because we want to allocate appropriate amounts to your project. And if we allocate that money, then that means that money could have gone to another project. There is a time limit on when the project funds should be expended by. And otherwise, if they're not expended by the time, then they just get liquidated. So please be very discerning and realistic with the funds asked for.
So our next question is from Ruel. Ruel is asking, can one nonprofit submit an application that features 2 projects or programs?
I think the answer to this question would be that this nonprofit should submit 2 applications, unless those 2 projects sort of work together as one. You should just send in 2 applications.
I want to add that if the project, if it can be one program, if the projects have related components, say you are have a project that is taking students out to the coast, and then you have another project where you're taking students to the aquarium to learn about species in the ocean, then that is allowed. That would just be considered a different project component.
And our last question, I believe, is just asking for clarification on the Watershed project's eligibility. It was answered earlier that watersheds do qualify, but Trish mentioned that no watersheds qualified except in the Santa Ana River region. So
and San Francisco, well, the Delta of San Francisco. Yeah.
Yeah, the Bay Area is different in that the SF Bay program allows funding pretty much across the Bay, whereas other parts of the state are still restricted to the coast.
Okay, that is all our questions.
Great. Well, for those of you who stuck around, thanks so much for sticking around and asking questions, and I hope this is really helpful. Please feel free to contact us if you have any more questions. Thank you.